The judge's voice echoed off the paneled walls as my name vanished from my father's will, and the room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old dust. Silas Merrick, 52. Company man fingers curled around the smooth wooden compass I'd carried in my jacket. Ever had a family meeting where the real storm was hidden in plain sight? At the long oak table of the old Merrick house. Thad smirked and said, "You're barely part of the company anymore, Silas." His voice carried just far enough to be polite and still reach every corner. I watched the smirk settle on his face like lacquer glossy, a little sticky, meant to last. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked as if it were keeping score. Light slanted in through the high windows, catching the dust that hung over the table like a thin veil. My coffee sat to my right, cooling. The cup's rim was chipped where my father's ring had once knocked it. The hairline crack stained the color of old tea. I turned the handle away from me out of habit and nodded as though Thad had just contributed something useful to the conversation. "Let's stay focused," Miriam said. Mother didn't raise her voice. She never had to. The years had distilled it down to something steadier than steel. She folded her hands on the placemat, her wedding band loose on the knuckle, and looked at my cousin, the way you look at a tangled rope. You'll have to untie yourself. We were supposed to be remembering my father, or at least pretending to. In practice, it was a meeting calendars out, pens uncapped, faces arranged. The formal announcement, the date and time for the will reading, had been the reason Thad told everyone to come. He liked announcements. They let him stand. Thursday, May 19th. Thad said, rolling the date on his tongue like he'd picked it out himself. 10 a.m., Washington County Courthouse. Simple, efficient, respectful. He had a talent for stacking adjectives. If you listened only to the cadence, he sounded like the kind of man you'd hand keys to. If you listened for the content, the words rarely added up to anything you could hold. Across from me, Cole flicked a thumb over his phone screen, light flashing blue on his jaw. He didn't look up when Thad spoke. The boy had inherited my uncle's shoulders and none of his patience. He'd been told his whole life that this table would eventually make room for him. It had not. He'd started tapping his foot under the chair months ago and never quite stopped. Cole, Miriam said softly. He sighed and slid the phone face down. For a second, I saw the old Cole, 8 years old in the mill yard, sawdust in his hair nose running in the cold before it was replaced by the man-sized restlessness we'd all helped cultivate. A lawyer's satchel rested beside Thad's chair. The leather was scratched, the buckles polished from too much handling. When he shifted his leg, I caught the corner of a wax-sealed envelope inside. The seal had the dull look of something pressed hard and fast like a notary's stamp done in a hurry. I didn't stare. I had learned over the years that staring invited a show. Not staring invited mistakes. "Silas, you're awfully quiet," Thad said. "Accounting must be keeping you up nights." "Internal control," I said. "And no, we sleep just fine once numbers tell the truth." He laughed, just enough volume to be friendly, just enough edge to warn me off. He had a gift for finding the tone that said, "We're all adults here, so let's behave," while announcing that he owned the room. If there was a market for tone, Thad would have cornered it before lunch. I took a breath and held it behind my teeth. Winter had settled in Montpelier like a long exhale. The smell of pine from the wreath over the mantel had gone from festive to faintly medicinal. The radiators popped as if disagreeing with the idea of heat. Father had hated the sound. He'd bang the valve with a crescent wrench and call the pipes by name. I could still see him across this same table pencil tucked over his ear sawdust flecked on his cuffs. He'd built order into his days with a carpenter's stubbornness measure twice cut once sand until the edge didn't catch a sweater. Numbers had been his way of sanding the world smooth. Thursday, then, Thad repeated. I've spoken to Evans at the courthouse. Everything is in hand. I didn't ask which hand. Instead, I lifted the coffee the taste had gone, leaving only warmth, and let my eyes travel to the wreath, the clock, the window, back to Thad's mouth. If you watch people long enough, their faces fall into the shapes they live in. Thad's default was a smile half a degree south of sincere. It made people feel like they were in on a joke. It took them a year to realize they were the joke. Your father would have wanted this simple, he added, and something in me clicked. People always tell you what they want by telling you what someone else would have wanted. I set the cup down carefully, aligning it with the ring mark it had already made on the runner. Miriam cleared her throat. We'll be respectful, she said. That's the word we'll keep. Of course, Thad said quickly. Respectful. He reached for the satchel, adjusted it a hair, then released it, as if it had adjusted itself. Cole's eyes flicked to mine. For a beat we were both 11 hiding nickels under a floorboard and calling it a bank. Then the beat was gone. Do you need anything from me before Thursday? I asked. Thad's eyebrows went up in a practiced arch of benevolence. Just your presence, he said. The rest? Well, the rest is already made. He said it like already made was a compliment. Like a bed. Like a decision you could lie down in and call comfortable. Outside, a truck rumbled past and carried the cold in with it. The room adjusted. So did we. I felt the outline of the compass against my ribs when I leaned back curved wood, the hand-carved initials that had been my father's, and now were simply mine. I had tucked it into my jacket pocket that morning without planning to. Habit is a kind of memory that doesn't need permission. Conversation broke into smaller pieces, condolences, reheated logistics, reheard. Someone asked whether the mill would shorten hours if the cold held. Someone else wondered about salt on the loading dock stairs. I answered what I could and let the rest float. When the clock struck the half hour, Thad lifted his glass. He was good at toasts. They gave him a reason to speak in paragraphs. To family, he said, and made sure to look at everyone except me. To the work that built this place. To doing right by what we've been given. A good toast is 90% rhythm. Even a hollow one sounds full if it keeps time. We lifted our glasses. Mine clinked with a deliberateness I couldn't completely disguise. The sound traveled. A few heads turned as if to locate the source of the minor chord. When people say they want simple, they usually mean they want silent. I've learned that silence often holds more facts than speech. So I did what I do best I counted. I counted the breaths between Thad's phrases. I counted the beats of the clock. I counted how many times Cole almost reached for his phone and stopped. I counted the ways Miriam's jaw tightened and relaxed in a loop. Numbers make a kind of music when you let them. Plates shifted. Chairs scraped. Thad leaned toward me as the others stood to fetch their coats, his chin tilted at a winning angle that had sealed more than one handshake on the loading dock. Best not to get your hopes up, he said softly, the friendly varnish back on his tone. You know how this goes. I met his eyes, and for the length of one tick from the grandfather clock, neither of us looked away. Then he smiled again, apology-sized for show, and raised his glass a fraction, as if we'd agreed on something. When he turned to answer someone across the table, I slid my hand inside my jacket and let my fingers find the compass. The wood was warm from my body, the carved initials smooth from a lifetime of thumbs. A tool, not an ornament. It had measured more than angles in our house. I pressed my palm flat over it and exhaled. We'll see about that. Back at my office, the heater clanked like it was coughing up secrets. The sound came in uneven bursts, followed by a hiss that curled under my desk and wrapped around my shoes. Outside, the mill's saws kept their steady grind, a low, rasping counterpoint that had been part of my life longer than my own handwriting. I hung my coat on the back of the chair and noticed the key sitting on my desk. Small brass, unremarkable except for the faint layer of dust along its ridges. It belonged to the locked supply cabinet in the records room. I hadn't touched it in months. Seeing it there felt like spotting a candle left burning in an empty house. The office still smelled like paper and ink, with just enough sawdust drifting up from the mill floor to make me think of my father's shop. I loosened my tie, powered up the terminal, and began calling up the pension fund statements. Pages and pages of numbers scrolled into view. I've learned to let the figures breathe before drawing conclusions. This time, though, the imbalance was obvious. 6 figures plain as the winter light spilling through the window. Not a rounding error. Not a bad column formula. This was subtraction with intent. Diane knocked on the doorframe, a legal pad clutched to her chest. "You're in early," she said. Her voice was careful, like she'd weighed every possible greeting and picked the least risky. The date put him in Boston the same week the largest withdrawal hit the fund. The printer came alive with a start humming unevenly like a nervous singer. Each sheet slapped into the tray edges still warm. I took the top page, scanned down the columns, and saw it bold, red, and final, a negative balance that could have bought every house on our street. My pulse ticked in my ears. I slid the summary sheet into my briefcase, tucking it between an old quarterly report and a folder of supplier contracts. The leather creaked as I closed the clasp. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, measured unhurried, drawing closer. The smell of cold air and cologne reached the doorway before the shadow did. I rested my hand on the briefcase and turned toward the sound, my face set in the same easy expression I'd worn at the family table. Some secrets, like some debts, get heavier the closer they come. Rowan Callister's voice over the phone carried the weight of courtrooms past. Let the paperwork speak for you. He never raised his tone. He didn't need to. Even after a decade in retirement, his sentences still landed like they had page numbers attached. By the time I reached Café Larkspur, the snow on State Street had turned to slush and was melting in slow rivulets toward the gutter. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon rolls and dark roast. My coat took in the warmth like it had been holding its breath. Rowan was already at the corner table back to the wall, a habit he probably never unlearned. "Silas," he said. Rising halfway, his grip warm and dry. His hair had gone silver in the years since I'd last seen him in person, but the eyes were unchanged, still sharp enough to sand a lie down to splinters. We ordered coffee, no sugar. As the steam curled up between us, he tapped the table twice with one finger. "Patience," he said. "That's your advantage now. You've got a lead. Don't lose it by rushing." I told him about the pension fund numbers, the meeting email, Diane's warning. He listened without interruption, only adjusting his glasses once. "I've heard chatter," he said finally. "Not from your mill, but close enough to smell the sawdust. There have been irregularities months back. Your timing is better than you think." The bell over the door jingled, letting in a quick draft and a woman with a guild patch on her parka. "Edda Pike," she said, hand extended. Vermont Woodworkers Guild. I know your father's work. If this gets loud, you've got people willing to vouch for you. I nodded, surprised. I might take you up on that. Rowan waited until she'd gone to the counter before leaning in. Evidence is like lumber. If it's warped, it won't hold. Keep your chain airtight, dates, signatures, originals where possible. If someone swapped documents, we need to prove it. I thought of the brass key, the locked cabinet, the red number at the bottom of the printout. I can get more, I said. I know you can. He reached down to the leather satchel at his feet, pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table. His finger tapped twice on the flap. Access codes for certain archives, quietly obtained, quietly used. I rested my palm on the envelope, the weight of it out of proportion to its size. Ro, you didn't get it from me, he said, sipping his coffee. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. One line of text. Check safe number 3 in the old office. Outside, a plow rumbled past, shaking the window. I looked at Rowan, but he was busy watching the steam rise from his cup, as if the next move was mine alone. The old mill's attic smelled of machine oil and old winters, the kind of cold that stays in the wood long after the heaters are off, mingling with dust and the faint tang of rust. Rain ticked steadily on the tin roof overhead, each drop a small, impatient drumbeat. I moved slowly, my flashlight beam skating over stacked ledgers, dented filing cabinets, and forgotten display boards from trade fairs 20 years gone. The door to the old office was still fitted with its original lock, but inside the safe's handle caught my eye, fresh scratches in the metal where none had been last time. Someone else had been here. The combination dial felt stiff, reluctant. I turned it by memory, listening for the clicks beneath the rain's rhythm. Safe number 3 had been my father's before the expansion. Now it held whatever scraps the family hadn't thought to move or burn. The last tumblers fell into place with a soft, solid clunk. Inside, the air smelled of damp paper. Manila folders sagged at the edges, their labels curling. On top sat a neat stack of withdrawal slips, the ink still sharp. Each was signed in Thad's deliberate looping hand, 6-figure amounts drawn from the pension fund, dates lining up with the red balance I'd seen in March. I slid them into a folder, then crossed to the dusty Xerox in the corner. The machine groaned, a wake light bar sweeping under the glass like a tired eye. Copies emerged, warm edges curling in the attic chill. The whir of the motor seemed loud enough to carry downstairs. A flicker of light at the doorway froze me. The night watchman's flashlight swept in a slow arc across the frame, followed by the murmur of his radio. I killed my own beam heart thudding in my ears. Footsteps shifted, then receded. I gathered the originals and the copies, sliding them into my briefcase. In my haste, my jacket caught on the desk's edge, yanking the wooden compass from my pocket. It hit the plank floor with a sound sharper than it should have been. The brass spindle snapped clean, the two halves rolling apart before I could grab them. I crouched, scooping up the pieces, feeling the sudden imbalance in my palm. The compass had been whole the last time I'd touched it. Now it was something else, part tool, part evidence of my own clumsiness. I slipped both halves into my pocket. The rain was heavier when I eased the door shut behind me, the roof's percussion masking my steps. Down the back stairs, past the darkened foreman's office, through the side exit into the night. Cold air met my face, sharp enough to clear the fog from my head. By the time the watchman's radio crackled again, I was already across the yard, the broken compass heavy in my coat, the pension slips sealed away, and the rain stitching the distance closed behind me. The probate room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old grievances. The benches had been rubbed smooth by decades of shifting weight, each creak in the wood marking a point of impatience or unease. Above us, narrow windows let in pale May sunlight that caught the floating dust motes in mid-air, like the room was holding its breath. I sat 2 rows back from the bench, hands clasped loosely in my lap. The estate attorney cleared his throat, unfolded a sheet of heavy paper, and began to read. My father's name, the formal bequests, the distribution of property, all laid out in the measured cadence of legal ritual. When the list of beneficiaries was done, I waited for my own name. It never came. Across the aisle, Thad leaned back slightly, one arm draped along the bench behind Miriam. When the attorney folded the will and placed it back in its folder, Thad turned his head just enough to give me a patronizing nod as if to say we both knew how this would go. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I noticed the court clerk standing near the judge's bench, a thick wax-sealed envelope tucked neatly under his arm. It was the kind of envelope used for codicil's addenda to a will. My pulse picked up, but I kept my voice even. Your Honor, I said, rising, I'd like to formally request examination of all codicils related to this estate pursuant to Vermont probate procedure. The judge, a man with silver hair and a pen balanced between his fingers, looked over the tops of his reading glasses. On what basis? On the basis that a complete record ensures a fair distribution, I replied, and that all such documents be entered into the proceeding before any decisions are final. There was a small ripple of movement in the room. Miriam's hands folded tighter in her lap, Cole shifting in his seat. Thad's jaw tightened a fraction. The judge tapped his pen against the desk, twice a slow rhythm. Very well. Proceedings will pause while we review the sealed material. He gestured to the clerk, who brought the envelope forward and placed it on the bench with care. Thad's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. He smoothed his tie, gave Miriam's shoulder a quick squeeze, and stepped into the hallway. Through the narrow glass panel in the door I could see him with his phone pressed hard to his ear, his smile stripped away. Inside the envelope sat in the center of the bench the red wax seal unbroken. The judge adjusted his glasses, and for a moment the only sound was the slow tick of the clock and the faint rhythmic creak of the chairs as the rest of us waited to see what the paper inside would undo. The wax cracked under the clerk's hand, a clean pop that carried through the courtroom and made Thad flinch. The seal split along a hairline seam, red crumbs flecking the bench like a warning. The judge nodded for him to proceed. Paper slid free with the soft rasp of something long kept, and finally asked to speak. The overhead fan clicked in a lazy circle, stirring the dust into the projector's cone of light. I stayed standing, palms down on the table, and watched the clerk pass the document up. The judge read in silence, mouth tightening once, then smoothing back into the practiced calm of his office. When he looked up, his eyes were careful. This codicil, he said, tapping the margin with his pen, is duly executed and notarized. It names Mr. Silas Merrick as sole heir and trustee of the Merrick estate with fiduciary responsibility for the company and its obligations. He let that sit long enough for the words to settle where they would. Somewhere behind me a chair creaked. Somewhere to my left Miriam exhaled like she'd been holding a winter in her lungs. Thad's smile tried to arrive and got lost on the way. His lawyer leaned in, whispering at a speed that suggested quantity might make up for quality. The judge lifted a hand, not unkindly. "We will address counsel in due course." My throat felt dry and steady at the same time. "Your Honor, I said I have exhibits pertinent to the court's understanding of recent financial movements tied to the estate. Proceed, he said. The projector screen squeaked down on its roller. I stepped to the cart, clipped the first exhibit into place. The light washed the far wall in pale gray, and then the numbers bloomed pension fund withdrawal slips, dates, and amounts in tidy rows. The signature at the bottom of each Thaddeus A. Merrick filled the room larger than life. Even blown up the tremor in the final K was visible a small shiver of ink where certainty had slipped. These withdrawals coincide with the weeks preceding Mr. Merrick's prior representations to the board, I said. They total 6 figures. Authorization is limited to 2 officers. Only 1 signature appears. The judge leaned forward. Noted. I advanced to the next exhibit, a chain of time-stamped emails. These are auto-sent confirmations from our custodian, I said, scheduled to forward to the trustee archive regardless of inbox rules. The timestamps stacked like fence pickets. I could feel Rowan's voice in my ear, let the paperwork speak for you, and tried not to smile. A murmur moved through the benches, not outrage exactly, but the soft rustle of a room rewriting its assumptions. Cole stared at the screen with the stunned focus of someone seeing his own reflection in a window he thought was dark. For the record, I said, clicking again, security footage from the record room the night before our files were marked, off limits. A black and white frame appeared the corridor outside the archives, the glow of a phone, a figure pausing at the door. The camera's angle spared us faces. The angle of the shoulders did not. I kept my voice even. We can make the original file available to Chambers. The independent auditor brought in under the court's authority, and nobody's cousin cleared his throat. Your Honor, my preliminary reconciliation supports Mr. Merrick's summary. The fund is undercapitalized by the amounts shown. The codicil assigning trusteeship to Mr. Silas Merrick would, in my professional opinion, better align fiduciary duty with corrective action. Thad's lawyer rose. Your Honor, we object to the implication, counsel, the judge said, not looking away from the exhibits. You may object to implications at closing. At present we are considering documents. He set his pen down, then picked it up again, tapping once against the pad as if to keep time with the fan. Given the codicil and the auditor's statement, this court orders an immediate freeze on all estate and company accounts under the control of Mr. Thaddeus Merrick pending final disposition. The clicking fan seemed to get louder. Thad's jaw set so hard the muscle jumped. He kept his eyes on the table as if the grain might offer an exit. I felt my hands settle into a calm I hadn't trusted since the day the numbers first didn't add up. Calm is not the same as victory. It's the clearance you need to keep working. I gathered the exhibits, squared their edges, returned them to the folder without haste. The judge made a note. The clerk collected the codicil with the same careful grip he'd used to open it. Further argument on remedies will be scheduled, the judge said. Given the estate's position, I suggest counsel confer with an eye toward efficiency. Thad's attorney stood again, buttoning his jacket as though that might fasten the day back into place. Your Honor, he said, voice smoother than his client's face. May we request a closed-door negotiation with opposing party and the court's auditor? There are matters best discussed outside the hearing of the gallery. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. The request hung in the warm, humming air between the benches and the bar, just long enough for everyone in the room to decide what it probably meant. The judge glanced at the clock, then at the fan, then at me. We'll take that under advisement, he said. and the room which had been breathing in held the breath a moment longer. Rowan waited for me in the mill office, a small box in his hands. Late light pooled across the workbenches, soft as varnish. Every curl of shavings caught a stripe of gold. Through the open window, the saws kept their slow, even buzz steady, almost content. Work resuming, life resuming. "Thought you'd want this back," he said, easing the lid open with the care of a man who'd opened too many exhibits to count. Inside lay my father's compass, the brass spindle bright where it had been repaired. The wood looked oiled, the carved initials darker, as if the letters themselves had rested. I set the box on the table and touched the spindle with my thumb. It felt different. Firmer, yes, but not the same firmness it had before it broke. Mended things carry a new kind of strength, one that remembers. My hand shook once, a small tremor I didn't hide. Rowan pulled his chair closer, and it gave the faintest squeak. "I had a friend at the college machine, the pin. Don't lose it again. Lawyers only get sentimental when we're done billing." I smiled. "You still know how to charge for a line like that?" He folded his hands, let his eyes drift to the window. "You doing all right, Silas? All right as a man can be with a ledger in one hand and a family in the other." I picked up the compass and felt the weight center in my palm. "We signed today." Rowan nodded the old trial day nod. "Then let's keep it clean." We didn't have to wait long. Thad arrived with his attorney tie, straight face composed into the kind of neutral that photographs well. Miriam came a step behind her hand on the doorframe as if checking it for plumb. Etta slipped in last, a sheaf of papers under her arm, smelling faintly of turpentine and fresh-cut maple. We sat at the big table my father had planned himself. No podiums, no seal on the wall, just a stack of documents and a pen with more weight than the ink could account for. Thad's attorney cleared his throat. "We appreciate the opportunity to resolve this without further spectacle." "Spectacle isn't our line," I said. "Repairs are." Thad looked at the window, then at me. I'd known that look since we were boys, the one that measured escape routes and judged the distance to the nearest bridge back. "I sign," he said. "You keep the family name intact." "You sign," I answered. "We make the pensioners whole, and the Guild publishes our new governance report. The name earns its keep." Rowan slid the agreement's forward restitution schedule, first resignation, next. They were plain pages, but they had a way of raising the air between us. The pen clicked in Thad's fingers. For a heartbeat I saw the tremor that had found his signature in the courtroom, and I understood some small part of it. A man's hand learning the difference between wanting and owing. He signed the first page, then the next. When he reached the last, he paused. "I didn't set out to break it," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Any of it. Neither did the weather that year," I said, surprising myself with the softness in my voice. "It still took the roof." The pen moved. He finished. His attorney gathered the pages like a dealer sweeping cards. Etta checked off 2 boxes on her sheet and gave me a quick, sober nod. Miriam hadn't sat down. She stood near the window, fingers worrying the edge of a handkerchief until it looked like lace. "I knew something was wrong," she said quietly. "I knew. I thought if I stayed still it might unhappen." I put the compass back in its box and closed the lid. "Stillness isn't the same as care, Mom. Sometimes it's just quiet." She looked at me, then really looked. I didn't want the town to talk. "They will," Etta said gently. "They always do. Better they speak about a fix than a cover." Miriam folded the handkerchief, smoothing each crease as if saving up calm. "Your father hated gossip," she murmured. "He said it was like sawdust in a cut it keeps the join from holding." Rowan pushed his chair back with that small squeak again, as if to mark the end of one music and the start of the next. "We're done," he said, "or as done as a day lets us be." Thad stood. For a second, the room held him the way a photograph holds a person, not the whole story, only the light. He looked at the box on the table at the compass, invisible under its lid, and gave a short nod to no one in particular. "Good luck, Silas." It wasn't generous, but it wasn't false. He and his attorney left by the side door. The echo of their shoes faded into the mill's steady hum. Edda set down her papers. "We'll help announce the restitution plan," she said. "Folks are kinder when they know what's being made right." "Thank you," I said. When she left, it was just the three of us, my mother, Rowan, and me. The late sun had lowered until it sat on the sill, warm as a hand on a shoulder. I carried the box to the small office that now held my name on the door letters, still crisp, the paint smell not yet surrendered to the room. I set the glass case on the shelf, new, simple, clean. The compass lay inside, spindle gleaming wood, dark as bread crust. I lifted it, fitted it into place, and closed the case. The reflection in the glass caught my face, and the workshop behind me, the benches, the clamps, the coil of extension cord, like a sleeping snake, the window full of late sky. Rowan came to stand beside me. "Feels different when it's up," he said. "It does," I said. "Things always look honest under glass, only if the hands that put them there are honest." He replied with the sort of mildness that doubles as a warning. Miriam's steps were light behind us. She touched the case with one finger, leaving no mark. "Your father would have liked this," she said. "He would have asked what took me so long," I said, and felt the smile reach my eyes for the first time in a while. We went back to the big table to finalize the notice to employees, the restitution schedule, the governance changes, the audit plans. Rowan read the paragraphs aloud, as if they were lines in a play we'd rehearsed for months. When he was satisfied, he capped his pen and put it in his pocket like a checked tool. "Tomorrow," he said, "you're not the man who found a hole. You're the man who built the patch. Don't confuse the two." I walked him to the door. The evening had cooled. A ribbon of sawdust trailed across the threshold. He shook my hand, the firm, quiet clasp that had steadied me since I was a young man, with more theory than skin. After he left, I found myself alone with the sounds I had grown up inside the distant saws, the occasional thunk of a board set down, the soft rattle of a window when a truck rolled past on the street. I turned to tidy the agreements when I noticed an envelope I hadn't opened propped against my lamp. Plain white college crest in the corner. Inside was a letter from the Vermont Technical College formal and hopeful in the same breath. They were launching a new fellowship in traditional and sustainable woodworking, and wondered if the Merrick name might anchor it, funding mentorship, maybe a Saturday lecture now and then. They had a timeline. They had a vision. They needed a yes. I held the letter in the pool of lamplight and listened to the mill breathe. Out in the yard, a forklift beeped as it backed up, sensible and ordinary. I looked toward the glass case. The compass caught a last sliver of sun and returned it without bravado, a small, precise gleam. I set the letter on top of the signed agreements, lining up the edges like good lumber, and stood there a long moment with the day still warm in my hands. The old mill yard had never looked so open. Tables set in tidy rows, saw horses draped with canvas banners flapping in the summer breeze like they'd remembered how to breathe. Someone had strung cafe lights from the loading dock to the fence line, and in daylight they looked like a promise held in reserve. The air carried two kinds of smoke barbecue from a pair of drum grills, and the sweet resin note of fresh-cut pine from the demonstration bench, where a planer whispered over short boards. At the gate, a hand-painted sign leaned into the sun. "Work with your hands, shape your future." The brushstrokes weren't perfect. I liked it better for that. Imperfect lines are the ones that prove a hand was there. People drifted in, employees with their families, neighbors who'd grown up hearing our saws at breakfast, city council folks, a reporter from the local paper whose notebook already had a smear of sauce on the margin. Etta moved through the yard with a clipboard and a carpenter's pencil behind her ear, double-checking items we'd triple-checked all week: name tags, safety glasses, the stack of release forms at the sign-in table. Miriam stood near the welcome tent in a blue dress the color of hydrangeas, greeting old friends with the softness she kept for births and weddings. When she noticed me looking, she gave a small nod as if to say, "This is the right kind of noise." I had printed the emails that mattered and clipped them to the board by the podium: invites from the technical college, the schedule for tonight's shop tours, the letterhead from the New England Woodworkers Association, asking if we'd present the fellowship model at their autumn meeting. Paper has a way of telling the truth in public that screens don't. The pages fluttered when a gust slid between the buildings. I smoothed the top sheet with my palm and felt a ridiculous rush of affection for Staples. Silas Etta said, appearing at my shoulder, "Your apprentices are lined up like they're waiting for roll call." I turned. 4 young people stood near the demo bench, each in a different state of trying to look like they weren't proud to be there. A tall kid with a silver hoop in one ear, a young woman with paint on her knuckles, and a grin she kept forgetting to contain. A quiet one in steel toes. And Cole hair shorter than last summer, buttoned down, borrowed, or bought for the day, hands empty for once. He caught my eye and lifted his chin in a hello that didn't ask for translation. For months we'd passed each other in the hallway and traded small talk about lumber grades and moisture content, the safe nouns men use while waiting for verbs to show up. Today he looked like a verb. "Folks," I said, stepping over, "this is the first Merrick Craft Fellowship class." I didn't raise my voice much. The yard did the work of carrying it. They'll be in the shop mornings and classes afternoons, and in the community on Saturdays fixing what needs fixing. We'll rotate them through joinery finishing and the boring parts. Nobody posts photos of inventory safety cleaning your mess. The tall kid laughed. The sound came out like relief. I handed out their name badges and the heavy canvas aprons we'd stamped with the mill mark. When I reached Cole, I paused. Up close, he looked younger and older than last year in equal measure. "Ready to be bored?" I asked. "Ready to work," he said. He wasn't showing off. He said it like a person trying a sentence on to see if it fit. We shook hands. His grip was steady, no phone biting into his palm, no glance over my shoulder to see who else might be watching. For a second, I saw us both at 10 pockets full of bent nails we were sure could be straightened. Then the second passed, and the yard filled in around us. At the podium, I kept it short. I talked about the point of the fellowship paying back into the place that paid us training hands to think and minds to measure. I announced what we'd promised to announce: our new transparency measures, the independent audit schedule posted on the company site, the quarterly open shop nights where anyone could walk the floor, watch a dovetail cut, ask what a line item meant. Numbers don't mind daylight. They only mind neglect. When I introduced the apprentices by name, people clapped the way Vermonters clap, when they mean it twice as warm as it sounds. Miriam wiped her eye with the corner of a handkerchief nobody else saw her take out. Edda squeezed my forearm once, quick as a tack set in the right place. The evening unspooled into stations. At one table, a carpenter showed how to square a board without cussing. At another, a retired shop teacher let little kids sand cedar until their cheeks went pink. I made the rounds with a plate I didn't have time to eat, catching fragments of talk my grandfather worked in that planer room. Is that ash or maple? How do you keep the edges from splintering? I answered what I could and admitted what I didn't know. Pride gets less useful the older I get. Curiosity has better legs. By the time the sun dropped to the roofline, the yard had settled into that good tired that comes from standing with neighbors longer than necessary. The reporter returned for a quote. I gave him one about stewardship that didn't taste like cardboard when I said it. The councilwoman asked whether we'd consider a second cohort in winter. Edda was already drafting the application in her head. The technical college rep pressed a folder into my hand with grant deadlines flagged in yellow. It felt like someone had put a small engine there and told me to keep it oiled. I slipped inside for a moment, seeking the kind of quiet that lets a thought land. The hall smelled like lemon oil and old paper, the mill's indoor weather. In my office, the late light had thinned to a ribbon across the shelf. The compass waited under glass, spindle, bright wood dock. For months, I'd meant to stop noticing it, and never quite had. I stood in the doorway and let the noise of the yard blur to a hum laughter through the screens. The soft slap of a screen door, a burst of applause when someone's tenon seated without shims. I checked the clock. Then the stack of remarks I'd written, just in case I ran out of words. I never have, not when it comes to lumber. People are another matter. Back outside, Cole was at the bench showing a kid how to mark a line with a knife instead of a pencil. He kept the child's hand safe by keeping his own steady fingers forming a fence that moved only when the blade was done. When the cut line shone a thin silver through the grain, the kid looked up like he'd been let in on something adults forgot to name. Cole saw me watching and didn't look away. We met again by the podium. They're asking about Saturday classes, he said. Can we do a session on fixing wobbly chairs? We can, I said. We'll start with the chairs that wobble the least and work our way up. He grinned. You're impossible. Not with a square, I said. And he rolled his eyes in a way that told me we were going to be fine. People gathered of their own accord, drawn by the dusk and the promise of a last speech before the first mosquito found us. I set my plate aside and wiped my hands on a napkin that had no chance of staying white. The microphone weighted a plain black cylinder with no magic in it, except the magic you put through. Miriam touched my elbow as I stepped onto the small pallet we were calling a stage. Make it simple, she whispered, and don't forget to breathe. I'll try both, I said. I glanced toward the office window just visible from the yard. The compass caught a scrap of the dying light and answered with a small exact gleam, as if to say that true stillness isn't the absence of motion, it's balance found after it. I held that thought like a level held to a board, then faced the crowd and reached for the switch that would carry my voice the short distance it needed to go. As the crowd thinned and the last banner fluttered in the cooling air, I caught the compass's repaired brass glinting from my office window, steady, centered whole again. It reminded me that justice isn't just about winning. It's about setting things right so others can build without fear. Sometimes the repairs we make to objects mirror the mending we do in ourselves, slow and imperfect, but lasting. For anyone standing in the rubble of loss, Know that new foundations can be laid one honest board at a time. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd like to hear your story.